This podcast is sponsored by Ramp. Look, there's feelings and then there's the facts. If you're feeling like your finance team is bogged down in mundane manual tasks, the fact is you need Ramp. Ramp is the corporate card that makes the expense process fast and easy. The moment your team makes a purchase, Ramp handles everything. Receipt collection and approvals, the works. With Ramp, you can cut your month-end close from 5 days to 1, customize approval workflows, and get complete control over every transaction. Facts. Over 25,000 businesses trust Ramp, including Shopify and the Boys and Girls Club of America, which is why they were just named #1 in spend management by G2. Facts. Start using Ramp and you'll have more time to spend scaling your business. And that'll feel really good. Upgrade to Ramp for free today and get $250 at ramp.com. That's ramp.com. RAMP.com.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to
DNA ID.
Brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1976, the heart of winter, February, in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. At 10:40 on Sunday morning, February 15th, a man got into his car to drive to some property he owned west of Calgary. His route took him under the Happy Valley overpass, where Highway 1 passed the road entering what was at the time the Happy Valley campground and recreation area. This was, at that time, 1.7 miles outside the city of Calgary. The Happy Valley recreation area has now been absorbed into the city and is a residential area named Valley Ridge. Anyway, as the man drove the darkened roadway under the overpass, he saw two figures lying by the side of the road. It was a very odd scene. When Cochrane RCMP Corporal Ron Atkin arrived, he found two teenage girls lying together on the icy, sloped concrete embankment between the pylons supporting the overpass overhead. This was at the very edge of the roadway. The two girls lay peacefully, almost as if asleep. They were fully clothed and had no apparent injuries. But they were cold and still. One lay face down, the other on her side. They were so close together that the arm of the girl who was face down was draped over the girl on her side. They weren't asleep. They were dead. They were soon identified as Patricia McQueen, known as Patsy, and Eva Dvorak, her bestie. One of them, Patsy, had been reported missing to the Calgary police, the RCMP quickly learned. Authorities responded to the scene. I need to point out here that although Patsy and Eva were both residents of the city of Calgary, they were found outside the city limits in the jurisdiction of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, referred to as the RCMP. RCMP constables and higher-ups at the scene remarked that they had no clue what had happened to the girls. There was no apparent cause of death. It could have been murder, it could have been an accident, it could have been an overdose. No one had any idea. The only thing they could rule out on the spot was that the girls had died of exposure, according to Sergeant Floyd McCausland of the Calgary RCMP. They were going to have to wait for autopsy results. Autopsies were conducted on Eva and Patsy on the 16th. The pathologist determined the girls had been dead for hours when the witness found them lying on the road. Both girls had small abrasions on their faces, but that was it. There was no sign of violence on either girl's body. The pathologist concluded that the girls had not succumbed to any kind of homicidal violence. However, there was an indication that they both could have died in the face-down position. Examination of the girls' genitalia revealed no overt signs of sexual assault, and both were found fully clothed. Their clothing appeared normal. Neither girl's attire was disrupted, inside out, crooked, or unfastened. But there were some signs of seminal fluid on some clothing items. Rape kits were conducted and retained. It was all very inconclusive, and that's what the autopsy results were. Inconclusive, meaning no manner or cause of death could be determined. By February 28th, it was reported that RCMP Corporal Roy Penoyer, the lead investigator on the case, suspected the deaths might have been caused by unusual drugs or poison. A tox screen was ordered on the assumption that answers would be found there. Let's talk about who the girls were. Patricia Marie McQueen was born on September 2nd, 1961, to Alastair and Sarah McQueen. The family of 13 lived at 2220 37th Street Southeast. According to a series of videos done by the RCMP, Patsy was sporty and adventurous. She loved music and dancing and playing with her 10 brothers and sisters. Eva Violet Dvorak lived at 3431 30A Avenue. Her family was Hungarian. Her mother was Marta Dvorak, and her stepfather was Alex Vukovic. Eva grew up with sisters Marta, Zaza, and Anita. Eva was always smiling, singing, and dancing. She had a lot of energy. Her family told the RCMP she was bubbly and bright. She loved roller skating and ice skating and hanging with her sisters and cousins. The 14-year-olds both attended Ian Bazalgette Junior High School in Calgary, Eva in the 8th grade and Patsy in 9th. Both girls were described as popular and very social. They were average students, their principal said in interviews. Much later, Eva's sisters spoke to the Calgary Herald. Eva's younger sister Zaza said, "We were always doing something. We were always out swimming, skating, visiting, or had company. It was always with family." But then, after Eva was found dead, she said, "We kept an eye on each other more than we did in the past. You kind of lose trust in society." Her sister Marta told the Herald that their mother went through hell as she had lost her husband in 1972 and now Eva. "My mom just fell into such a depression," she said. Of course, both families struggled with the senselessness and incomprehensibility of the girls' deaths. No one could even tell them how the girls had died, much less why. Patsy's uncle Wick McQueen was an inspector with the RCMP. The agency worked all cases diligently, but this one had a special poignancy to the Mounties. No one believed that Patsy and Eva had just laid face down on the roadway and died. Indeed, there was very good reason for the RCMP to believe that the girls had been deliberately placed where they were found, side by side, under the overpass after they were already dead. Constable Daniel Lyon interviewed 4 people who had driven through the underpass on the roadway where the girls were found that very morning and had not noticed anything. All 4 had driven under the underpass between 8:30 and 10:15 a.m. One of the drivers was a Calgary City Police sergeant, someone whom one would hope would be particularly observant of 2 dead bodies lying next to the road. If, in fact, the bodies were not there when the witnesses drove the roadway, that meant they had been placed there between 10:15 a.m. and when they were found at 10:45 or 10:50 a.m. Police believed their bodies had been dragged out of a vehicle and placed on the roadside. It was deemed likely that Patsy's arm draped over Eva was the arm used to move Patsy to where she lay. She had been moved second. On February 25th, 10 days after the girls were found, an Edmonton RCMP spokesman told the Red Deer Advocate that crime lab investigators were still working to see if they could determine the cause of death. They were focusing on the toxicology, presuming that an overdose of drugs or alcohol might be the cause. Despite the undetermined cause of death, quote, "the concerning nature of 2 young females being found deceased together on the side of a roadway led police to investigate their deaths as suspicious." That from the RCMP. So the RCMP had been doing all the usual things in the investigation, interviewing the families of both girls, trying to identify any boyfriends, and pinpointing the girls' activities between Thursday after school and Sunday when they were found. Some of the information they learned contributed to the overdose theory. Here was the timeline the RCMP established. Eva and Patsy had attended school on Thursday, February 12th. At school, they got in trouble. Big trouble. It's not clear how this happened, but both girls got caught with alcohol on their breath. They were expelled and they left together. Being young and without fully developed frontal cortexes, the girls decided not to go home and confront their parents with this news. Instead, they went to a friend's house and smoked some pot and crashed there. The next day, since they had no obligation to go to school, they hung out all day at this same friend's house, smoking some more. That night, they went to a party and drank with a group of older boys. After midnight, they left and went to another party, where they spent the night. Neither girl checked in with her family, prompting the missing persons report from Patsy's parents. They reported their daughter missing. On Saturday, the girls woke up at the second party house and shared a tab of LSD they got from someone there. Then they went back to the scene of the first party. They hung out there and played cards. No real partying happened that night. Then late on Saturday night, they left. There was one last verified sighting of the girls. Around 12:30 on Sunday, February 15th, 1976, Eva and Patsy were seen by a male neighbor they both knew as they hitchhiked together near 9th Avenue and 12th Street Southeast. They told him they were heading towards downtown Calgary. They refused a ride, knowing that the neighbor would insist on bringing them home. He noted that they seemed to have been drinking. That was the last sighting of Patsy and Eva alive. They ended up the next morning under the overpass. Sergeant McCausland told the Leader Post one day after the bodies were found, quote, "Somebody wanted to hide something." Because they knew that the girls were hitchhiking within hours of being found deceased, the RCMP formed the theory that the girls were picked up by someone in a vehicle and taken somewhere where their deaths occurred. Then they were dropped off and placed under the overpass. Where they were taken and what exactly happened there was a mystery. The autopsy results, which were unable to find any specific cause of death for two healthy 14-year-old girls, was considered unsatisfactory to everyone. The decision was made to conduct a second autopsy on each girl, this time by the Alberta Chief Medical Examiner Dr. John Butt. The procedures were done on the 26th. The reality is Dr. Butt wasn't really able to figure out the puzzle either. He chalked the deaths up to asphyxia, which could have happened any number of ways. Here is a quote from Dr. Butt. "The possibilities of homicide in this case includes strangulation, smothering, homicidal poisoning, vagal inhibition secondary to an attempted strangulation, and a rarer cause, such as cyanide or carbon monoxide that has already been ruled out," end quote. Given these findings, Eva's and Patsy's deaths were classified as sudden deaths, not homicides. Again, Dr. Butt, quote, "The possibilities for a drug-related accident are more likely." They were still awaiting toxicology results. The investigators had learned that drug use at Bazalgette Junior High was pretty rampant, although the students generally said no needle drugs were commonly used. Still, perhaps Eva and Patsy had just overdosed. Again, all hopes were placed on the toxicology results to provide some answers, but it didn't happen. The only substance the tox screen detected in the girls' system was alcohol, and nowhere close to an amount that would kill them. The girls had blood alcohol levels between 0.05 and 0.14. Police investigation had revealed that on Saturday, the 14th, both girls had ingested LSD, pot, and alcohol. According to witnesses, this was willingly done by both girls. No one forced them or drugged them. The LSD and pot had passed out of their system by the time the tox screen was done, so they weren't detected by the testing. But Staff Sergeant Harold Metcalf, head of the RCMP General Investigations Section, told the Calgary Herald on March 30th, quote, "There is no death on record in the United States or Canada that shows the combination of these three drugs will kill anybody, period." In other words, these girls didn't die from a little LSD trip. They later learned that additional drugs had been present in some of the gatherings the girls had been at, including hashish and MDMA as well as sniffing glue, but those drugs were not in the girls' systems. The theory that they had expired from those substances was not popular among the investigative team. As it stood at the end of March, investigators were resorting to far-fetched theories to explain the deaths, including some kind of accident involving inhalation of a gas propellant from an aerosol can. The gas would have been gone from Eva and Patsy's systems before the tox screen was done. Without evidence of foul play, the only crime police could say for a fact had occurred was disrespect for a human body, committed by whoever had dragged the girls and left them under the overpass. The investigation into the girls' deaths was thorough and exhaustive. All the people who had come into contact with them over the weekend before they turned up dead on Sunday morning had to be identified, interviewed, vetted, and determined to be a potential suspect or not. Even if the girls weren't murdered, they must have been with someone who ditched their bodies under the overpass in an effort to put some distance between himself and the deaths. or a complete stranger could have picked them up hitchhiking and taken them to a third location where they died. That possibility, of course, significantly widened the suspect pool. And the possible role of drug trafficking in the deaths had to be considered as well. In April, Corporal Roy Penoyer of the RCMP told the Calgary Herald that the group investigating the deaths, which included 2 RCMP and 2 Calgary homicide detectives, have, quote, nothing at all as far as a suspect. Hi guys, I'm so excited to welcome a new sponsor to DNA ID and just in time for the holidays. Just like most people, I typically have crazy holiday shopping anxiety because my family tradition is that everyone gifts everyone, meaning I need to deliver fun, practical, and affordable gifts to my brother, my husband, my brother-in-law, my sons, my dad. That's a lot of men, and that's a lot of hair. And this is where today's sponsor comes in, Manscaped, the ultimate grooming experience. I'm gifting everyone the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra by Manscaped. This package is an incredible value with 5 components plus some extra goodies. Look, despite all the stuff I talk about on this show, it's awkward to talk to my teenage sons about personal grooming, or let my brother know that he could start braiding his nose hairs. My husband received this set of Manscaped products so we could personally try them out before I did this ad, and he's never looked back. The Performance Package 5.0 Ultra is a true seasonal survival kit, including the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra waterproof groin and body hair trimmer for precise, smooth trimming with reduced risk of nicks and ingrown hairs. It also includes the Weed Whacker 2.0 ear and nose hair trimmer to keep those unsightly strands from making an appearance at the dinner table. And for ball aftercare, the Crop Soother Aftershave Lotion and Crop Preserver Anti-Chafing Deodorant will make sure the only chafe he has going on is the political debate around the eggnog bowl. The Performance Package 5.0 Ultra by Manscaped also comes with 2 holiday bonuses. The Comfy Boxers 2.0 Midnight Bravo in whatever size you specify, and the Shed 2.0 Toiletry Bag, so he has everything he needs on hand to tame the pelt below the belt. So have the beloved men in your life join the over 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped to keep it tight. Head over to manscaped.com and order the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra by Manscaped and cross holiday shopping off your to-do list. And you can get 20% off and free shipping with the code DNAID, all one word, at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code DNAID at manscaped.com. Help him stay on top of his grooming game and be ready for anything the season throws his way.
This podcast is sponsored by Ramp. Look, there's feelings and then there's the facts. If you're feeling like your finance team is bogged down in mundane manual tasks, the fact is you need Ramp. Ramp is the corporate card that makes the expense process fast and easy. The moment your team makes a purchase, Ramp handles everything. Receipt collection and approvals, the works. With Ramp, you can cut your month-end close from 5 days to 1, customize approval workflows, and get complete control over every transaction. Facts. Over 25,000 businesses trust Ramp, including Shopify and the Boys and Girls Club of America, which is why they were just named #1 in spend management by G2. Facts. Start using Ramp and you'll have more time to spend scaling your business. And that'll feel really good. Upgrade to Ramp for free today and get $250 at ramp.com. That's ramp.com. RAMP.com.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
Several vehicles were seen in the area of the overpass in the 10 to 10:45 a.m. timeframe by people who called in tips, but police were never able to identify a particular vehicle linked to the bodies. On September 20th, an inquest on the McQueen-Dvorak case was held. An inquest is similar to a mini-trial in which a 6-person jury weighs the facts of the case and makes determinations as to cause of death, murder versus accident, and so on. Constable Daniel Lyons of the RCMP told the jury, quote, "The lab results gave us absolutely nothing to indicate what caused their deaths. There's only one person that's going to be able to tell us that is the person who took them there." Dr. Butt testified also. He told the jury the autopsy had been inconclusive about the cause of death, and there was no evidence of sexual assault either. However, there was, quote, "some evidence," end quote, that the girls had died from lack of oxygen. He said this was definitely not attributable to strangulation because the girls had no marks whatsoever on either of their necks. He believed their deaths were the result of a drug-related accident resulting in respiratory failure, passing out and smothering in a plastic bag while inhaling glue, drowning in a shallow puddle after passing out on drugs, having an asthmatic type of reaction to drugs, or something like that. The inquest jury was unable to reach a verdict as to the cause and manner of death. Judge K.J. Plump tut-tutted the whole situation, saying the deaths were, quote, a sad and tragic situation. Who could believe that 14 and 15-year-olds could be running free like this? They're just children. He frowned on a society where young girls like Patsy and Eva could roam from party to party and be continually furnished with drugs and alcohol. The failure of the inquest to reach any conclusions did not halt the RCMP investigation, which plodded on under Corporal Penoyer. But soon, the Calgary area RCMP would have even more on its plate. On September 16th, 4 days before the inquest on Eva and Patsy's cases was conducted, another body was found. At 10:50 a.m., motorists were heading to the First Nations Morley Reserve along what is now Township Road 252 in Cochrane, about 22 kilometers or 13 miles west of Calgary. 252 was a rural gravel roadway that wound through fields and grasslands, making the bundle of bright fabric lying in a ditch down a hillside from the road very evident. But it wasn't a bundle of fabric. It was a fully clothed, dead woman. She was 20-year-old Melissa Ann Rehorek. Melissa's name was deduced from the contents of a red plastic shopping tote, which lay about 30 feet from her body and contained a wallet with ID and a $5 bill, and other personal items like makeup and a toothbrush. It didn't appear that anyone had rifled the bag, as its contents were all undisturbed. Also in the bag was a notebook containing names and addresses which police would eventually conclude were the names of people with whom Melissa had hitchhiked rides across North America. I'd like to say a little word about hitchhiking here. We've all heard that hitchhiking was much more common back in the 60s and 70s. In Canada, this was not just an accepted mode of transportation, it was encouraged. The Trans-Canada Highway was new, and the government endorsed Canadian citizens getting out and exploring it. This is from the Calgary Herald, quote, in the early 1970s, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's government encouraged young people to traverse the country, opening a network of free hostels countrywide. The PM advised young Canadians, hit the road, drive or hitchhike, and see what Canada's all about, end quote. Now, obviously, none of that was intended to have the effect of putting young women like Melissa, Eva, and Patsy in harm's way, but hitchhiking was commonplace and generally considered safe. Outcomes like these murders were shocking because they were so unusual. As mentioned, Melissa was fully clothed, and there was no evident cause of death noticeable to the RCMP officers who responded to the scene in the windswept Cochrane moors. Melissa was brought into the autopsy suite wearing a denim jacket and skirt, a red blouse, and a bra and underwear. She had long dark hair, was 5 foot 2 inches tall, and weighed 125 pounds. She was missing her shoes, which were located right near her body. Dr. John Butt, again the pathologist, determined the cause of Melissa's death to be asphyxia as a result of manual strangulation. Evidence showed that she had been struck in the head by what the doctor posited was a fist. In other words, she'd been beaten. Again, there were no overt signs of sexual assault detected in Melissa's autopsy. But again, seminal fluid was detected in a rape kit and on Melissa's clothing. And several foreign dark brown hairs were collected from Melissa's hand during her autopsy. These were examined and retained in evidence. So who was Melissa? Melissa was the eldest daughter of Rudy and Margaret Rehorek. She had a younger brother, Jim, and a younger sister named Diane. At age 20, Melissa had achieved completion of 2 very challenging grade 13 subjects, chemistry and mathematics. But she wanted to pursue her dream of being a physiotherapist. In 1974, she left Centennial Secondary School in Windsor, Ontario, and moved to Calgary with a girlfriend, Kristen C. They had only lived in the area for about a month. The Windsor Star described Melissa as quiet and introspective, someone who didn't stand out from the crowd. She was living at the YWCA in downtown Calgary and had a small circle of friends in the area, whom police spoke with at length. Melissa worked a succession of odd jobs in Calgary, including as a chambermaid. She was currently working as a hotel housekeeper at the International Hotel in the Banff area of Calgary and was known as a hard worker and nature lover. Her mother, Margaret, told the Calgary Herald that her daughter had been planning on returning home to attend college, but then changed her mind. Margaret received a letter from Melissa 1 day before she was found killed. The letter talked about how she had decided to stay in Alberta and had the possible opportunity of a job in childcare. The letter was signed, quote, a happy Melissa. Margaret wrote a letter to the Calgary Herald a month after her daughter's murder. It said, quote, "We just hope he will be caught and punished because life will be unbearable otherwise for all of us. If the person could only know the grief he has caused this family." 20 RCMP officers from Cochrane and Calgary worked Melissa's case in its initial days. A thorough examination of the scene revealed signs that a fierce struggle had taken place on the gravel roadside above the ditch. I can't really see the disrupted ground in the old-timey crime scene photos, but police were and are certain that Melissa had fought her attacker and died right there. Then she'd been dragged down the grassy slope to the ditch where she was found. This was remarkable because while the area where Melissa was found was somewhat remote, there were homes and businesses nearby. It wasn't the middle of nowhere. Melissa's killer was very brazen in taking a chance that no one would see his car pulled over and him struggling to choke Melissa to death. I can only guess that the whole thing went down in the dark of night, but we don't know for certain that was the case. The timeline was as follows. Melissa was last seen by her roommates at the YWCA around 8 p.m. on Wednesday, September 15, 1976. She told them she was planning to get out of town, hitchhiking into the mountains west of Calgary for her 2 days off. When she waved goodbye, she was wearing the same clothing she was found dead in. It's believed she took a city transit bus. A bus driver said he dropped someone looking like Melissa off in the Bowness area close to Highway 1. From there, Melissa would have hitchhiked west out of town along Highway 1. Her body was found the next day 2 miles from the Trans-Canada Highway. Early police efforts focused around the scene and vehicles observed in the area in the hours leading up to Melissa's being found. There are reports that a large gray vehicle was seen in the area on September 15th, but I can't verify that. Footprints from both Melissa and an unknown person, believed to be the suspect, were photographed and casted, but there was nothing unique or identifying about them. The same was true for tire tracks located on the roadside. The Windsor Star reported that thousands and thousands of man-hours were spent on Melissa's case. Earl McLeod of the RCMP in Cochrane told the publication that more than 200 people across Canada were considered possible suspects and investigated by police. The vast majority of these were men with histories of committing similar violent crimes against women. A $1,000 reward for information in Melissa's case was offered by the Alberta government, but it went unclaimed. Even though Eva and Patsy's deaths were not officially considered murders, police quickly drew connections between their case and Melissa's. Sergeant Floyd McCausland of the Calgary RCMP, who had worked Eva and Patsy's case, was one of the first to comment publicly that the cases could be linked. He also pointed to the murder of 16-year-old Pauline Brazeau of Calgary. Let's talk about that one. Pauline was part of the large Métis Brazeau family from Yorkton, Saskatchewan. The small house she grew up in was crowded with 8 people, including her siblings, her parents, and 2 orphaned cousins. She and her older sister Nancy left for Calgary in the late fall of 1975, with Pauline's 7-month-old daughter in tow. The 2 teen sisters moved to the city where an aunt lived to find work and opportunity. Pauline got a job as a waitress at an Italian restaurant, Pepe's, on 17th Avenue Southwest. That's where she was last seen alive 1 month later. On the night of January 8th to 9th, 1976, Pauline was visiting and partying at her aunt's house in Calgary's West End, and then she and a female friend went to the restaurant where she worked, Pepe's, to get late-night pizza. The 2 left the restaurant together at 2:30 a.m. on January 9th, but Pauline forgot her gloves, so she returned to the bar alone to retrieve them. She left alone before 3 a.m. Her partially nude body was found just 5 hours later on a forestry road near Jumping Pound Airstrip, 40 miles southwest of Cochrane. She had been stabbed to death. According to the Calgary Herald, Pauline was believed to have been hitchhiking along 17th Avenue Southwest in Calgary. She was a frequent hitchhiker, and police suspected she accepted a ride from someone when she left the restaurant on that cold January night. Quote, an autopsy revealed she had had intercourse prior to her death, but the investigators are uncertain whether she was raped. Pauline's body was found 12 miles, 19 kilometers south of Melissa's murder scene. Pauline's sister Nancy spoke with the CBC. In fall time, I guess she got a job, I got a job, and I decided to come back right after the new year, and she decided to stay and work. It was like 9 days later we got the word here. Nancy described her younger sister, whose daughter was raised by her parents after her death, as outgoing and friendly. A police investigation into Pauline's death determined that she was very social despite being new to town and was well liked by everyone she came into contact with. No one in her inner circle seemed to have a motive to kill her. Pauline's case went cold.
Missions to Mars, driverless cars, AI chatbots. Feels like we're already living in the future. Well, Robinhood is built for the future of trading. Robinhood's intuitive design makes trading seamless. Spot opportunities and take control of your trades with tools like screeners, simulated returns, and Strategy Builder. On Robinhood, traders have access to hundreds of popular stocks and ETFs, 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, so you can keep up with today's fast-paced markets. You can now even trade stocks and crypto all in one place with the new desktop platform, Robinhood Legend. The future of trading is fast, powerful, and precise. Experience it now on Robinhood. Investing is risky. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Trading during extended hours involves additional risks. Cryptocurrency services are offered through an account with Robinhood Crypto LLC, NMLS ID 1702840. Robinhood Crypto is licensed to engage in virtual currency business activity by the New York State Department of Financial Services.
This podcast is sponsored by Ramp. Look, there's feelings, and then there's the facts. If you're feeling like your finance team is bogged down in mundane manual tasks, the fact is, you need Ramp. Ramp is the corporate card that makes the expense process fast and easy. The moment your team makes a purchase, Ramp handles everything. Receipt collection and approvals, the works. With Ramp, you can cut your month-end close from 5 days to 1, customize approval workflows, and get complete control over every transaction. Facts. Over 25,000 businesses trust Ramp, including Shopify and the Boys and Girls Club of America, which is why they were just named #1 in spend management by G2. Facts. Start using Ramp and you'll have more time to spend scaling your business. And that'll feel really good. Upgrade to Ramp for free today and get $250 at ramp.com. That's ramp.com. RAMP.com.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
The year after Pauline was killed, in 1977, the body of 19-year-old Barbara MacLean was discovered 62 feet outside what was then Calgary's city limits. Barbara was the youngest of 4 siblings, 2 boys and 2 girls, born to the family of a doctor, Jim MacLean, who lived in the tiny town of Inverness in Nova Scotia. Eager to break away from the sleepy village and gain some independence, Barbara had moved to Calgary right after high school and lived with her brothers Jim and Bobby on Adelston Drive southeast. She later moved in with her boyfriend, who has not been named publicly. Barbara found work as a hat check girl at the Scotch and Sirloin before landing a job as a file clerk at a Royal Bank branch in downtown Calgary. Her goal was to save some money and then return home the following year to go to college. She liked living in Calgary, but recently had been a little homesick and planned to return home for a week-long visit. At 8 a.m. on February 26, 1977, 5 months after she moved to Calgary, a man walking his dog found Barbara strangled beside a gravel road in a remote area 1/4 mile north of 80th Avenue and 6th Street Northeast. This Beddington Creek area was just outside the city limits of Calgary, near the airport, and was described as a lover's lane. Barbara was fully clothed, but her coat was on inside out. As with Melissa, disrupted foliage and dirt at the scene, as well as footprints, indicated that Barbara had struggled with her attacker and succumbed where she was found. Barbara's autopsy by Dr. John Butt determined that she had died from asphyxia due to manual strangulation. She had fresh bruises and abrasions on various parts of her body, including a heavy pattern of dark contusions on the front of her throat. Abrasions on her fingertips suggested she had been dragged while alive. A few clumps of dark brown hair were found on her clothes and person that were inconsistent with her own. Just like in Melissa's case, whether Barbara had been sexually assaulted could not be determined by the pathologist, but seminal fluid was detected on her clothing. A rape kit was collected and retained in evidence. Police learned that on the night of Friday, February 26th, Barbara had gone to the Highlander Hotel Tavern with her brother Bobby, her boyfriend, and a group of friends to attend a cabaret. The Highlander was located at 16th Avenue and 14th Street Northwest in Calgary. her live-in boyfriend was reportedly asked to leave the bar because he was intoxicated. Barbara left the bar and went out to talk to her boyfriend in the parking lot, and she took away the keys to his green Volvo. In a rage, the boyfriend ran from the Highlander parking lot across 16th Avenue to the North Hills Center Mall parking lot. Barbara chased him, and then she disappeared. Witnesses reported they had seen Barbara running across the road from the Highlander Hotel to the North Hills Shopping Center. Barbara was last seen around 2 a.m. near the North Hills Cinema. Her boyfriend reported that after she chased him, he never saw her again. Of course, police put Barbara's boyfriend under a microscope. He had no idea what happened to her, he said. His roommate reported that the boyfriend had gotten home at 2:30 a.m. enraged that Barbara had taken his keys and he had to take a cab home. Media reports were that he was so pissed off that he ripped a foam sleeping pad in two and then went to sleep in the bathtub. The timing was tight for the boyfriend to have killed Barbara and driven her to where she was found, and he said he didn't have access to his car. But the interaction between the boyfriend and Barbara definitely concerned the police, and whiffs of domestic violence made police suspicious of him because of the known association between domestic violence and the murder of female partners. The boyfriend remained on the suspect list, although he remained cooperative for 50 years until he was finally cleared after someone else was credited with Barbara's murder. Police could not figure out what had happened to Barbara since she was seen around 2 a.m. near the movie theater. She was not known to hitchhike, but did regularly make use of city taxis, and she could not have walked home. For that reason, Calgary city taxi drivers were a primary focus of the early investigation, on the theory that Barbara would have flagged down a passing cab and gotten into it without a second thought. Barbara's family reported that she was a very friendly person, perhaps a little too trusting, having just come from a small town. Police found that Barbara had plentiful friends and was very well liked. They could find no motive in her social life for her murder. The staff at the Highlander and men who were in the cabaret that night were all looked at thoroughly. RCMP Sergeant Ted Ellis told the media that all of Barbara's friends and acquaintances had been checked out. Quote, "We are now looking into the possibility that MacLean did not know her murderer," end quote. Barbara's body was flown back to Nova Scotia for burial. When her killer was not named right away, Barbara's father told the Calgary Albertan, quote, "It might take 2 or 3 years, but I'm confident that the man will be found. It's all a matter of time." Well, little did he know how much time. Behind the scenes, the RCMP had its first solid evidence. The short brown hairs found on Barbara were compared under a microscope to the hairs found on Melissa Rehorek, and they were found to be similar. Because of this fact, based on hair analysis, which we now know is unreliable but back then was considered quite scientific, and based on the incredible similarities in the circumstances of Barbara's and Melissa's cases, police worked them under the presumption that the same offender was responsible for both murders. In the late summer of 1977, Sergeant Ted Ellis, then the head of the Calgary RCMP General Investigations Section, said full-time investigators were actively working the Pauline, Barbara, and Melissa cases. They had interviewed over 1,000 people by August of 77. This included vetting 350 to 400 Calgary taxi drivers and collecting hair samples from any of those who had dark brown hair. In fact, by the end of the year, 600 men had provided hair samples for comparison. Ellis told the Calgary Herald his team had looked at every kinky fellow who grabs his girlfriend by the throat if he's got the right hair color. As I mentioned, because of the similar circumstances, MOs, and hairs, Ellis believed that Melissa and Barbara were likely killed by the same person. The similarities could not be ignored. In Pauline's case, he wasn't as convinced. Pauline was stabbed, whereas the other two were strangled. She was partially nude, whereas Melissa and Barbara were clothed. But there was no evidence of rape in any of Barbara's, Melissa's, or Pauline's cases, even though semen and sperm indicated they had all had sexual intercourse at the most 1 or 2 days before their deaths. But absent rape, if there was no sexual motive, the crimes were apparently motiveless. And then we have a real kook, Ellis said. From that point forward, the men looked at in Melissa's and Barbara's cases were not known to them. They were typically men who had committed other similar crimes, whose criminal history and backgrounds drew attention to them. On July 1st, 1976, with the Eva and Patsy investigation several months old and the Melissa Rehorek investigation still 2 months away, Tara Jane White went missing. The 5'1" tall brunette, 18-year-old, was on summer break after her first year of pre-med studies at the University of Calgary. She'd gone to Calgary for the July 1st holiday weekend to see her boyfriend and then set out to return to her job at Lake Louise. Her brother Cliff told the Calgary Herald, quote, "She had said she would either take a bus or hitchhike," end quote. Tara was last seen by a family friend walking alone in Calgary, crossing a field toward Crowchild Trail Northwest. She was reported missing on July 3rd. When she remained missing with not one shred of a clue or information into what happened to her, her mother, Beverly, could not handle the anxiety and took her own life 16 days later. Her husband, Cliff, said that Beverly was frustrated with what she perceived as not enough being done to find her daughter and refused to tolerate any considerations that Tara could have run away. He went on to marry Beverly's sister, Patsy, and raised Tara's 3 brothers. In 1981, Tara was found by 2 kids playing in the woods. Her body was buried in a shallow grave in the woods on the Morley Reservation. She had to be identified by dental records. It was not evident from her body that she'd been murdered, but the shallow grave was a good indication that she had not died of natural causes. Her death was believed to have occurred right around the time she went missing 5 years earlier. The proximity of her crime scene to that of Melissa Rehorek could not be ignored. Both were on or near the Morley Reservation, and the finding of Tara's body and renewed inquiry into her case in turn revitalized the Rehorek, Dvorak, and McQueen cases. They and Tara had all been killed in 1976 or early 1977, and all causes of death appeared to be asphyxia or strangulation. They had all died in proximity to the Trans-Canada Highway. Golden RCMP Corporal Blair Schofley told the Vancouver Sun that Tara's case might be connected to others in the area. The renewed attention stimulated additional investigation on all the cases and brought fresh sets of eyes to the case files. That year, 1981, a man charged with 11 murders in British Columbia was considered for the Calgary area string of murders. 41-year-old Clifford Olson had been arrested for killing 11 young people, all between the ages of 9 and 18, in British Columbia. This from the Vancouver Sun, quote, "By the time of his arrest on August 12, 1981, Clifford Olson had murdered 11 young people. His 1982 convictions made him Canada's first modern serial killer. He delivered his guilty pleas choking back crocodile tears. They brought not relief but sordid revelations. Police paid the 41-year-old petty recidivist and rat $100,000. $10,000 counted out in rose-colored $1,000 bills for the remains of each young victim. He provided one as a freebie. The money was placed into a trust for Olson's wife and young son. Olson was unlikely to be the killer of the Calgary women and girls. His methods were generally much more brutish, including bludgeoning and driving nails into the heads of some of his victims while they were still alive. But of course, police had to consider him. But they weren't able to place him in Calgary during any of the murders of Melissa, Pauline, Barbara, or Tara. By November 1981, the investigation had slowed significantly. According to the Windsor Star, the RCMP had questioned thousands of people and run down thousands of leads, all for nothing. They still weren't even certain that any of the cases were related. Earl McLeod, an investigator with the RCMP's Calgary detachment, told the Windsor Star that the Calgary murder cases were still an ongoing investigation, quote, "But it's not as thorough now. These ones have kind of died out. There's nothing left to go on." McLeod acknowledged that the chances of solving any of the crimes was remote at this point, 5 years out, but said that the books would always stay open and any tips or leads from the public were welcome. He said if the killings were related, then, quote, "I would say it's a psychopath. It could have been somebody who was in the area for a short period of time, committed the murders if there is a connection, and then moved on to some other part of the world," end quote. He was onto something.
This podcast is sponsored by Ramp. Look, there's feelings, and then there's the facts. If you're feeling like your finance team is bogged down in mundane manual tasks, the fact is, you need Ramp. Ramp is the corporate card that makes the expense process fast and easy. The moment your team makes a purchase, Ramp handles everything. Receipt collection and approvals, the works. With Ramp, you can cut your month-end close from 5 days to 1, customize approval workflows, and get complete control over every transaction. Facts. Over 25,000 businesses trust Ramp, including Shopify and the Boys and Girls Club of America, which is why they were just named #1 in spend management by G2. Facts. Start using Ramp and you'll have more time to spend scaling your business. And that'll feel really good. Upgrade to Ramp for free today and get $250 at ramp.com. That's ramp.com. RAMP.com.
Cards issued by Sutton Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply.
In November 1981, Kamloops RCMP investigator Mike Eastham called a conference relating to the so-called highway murders. Investigators were very concerned about the slayings of 28 young women in Alberta and British Columbia from 1969 to 1981. All of the women had last been seen hitchhiking or walking on roadways in British Columbia and Alberta. Many of them were sexually assaulted and strangled. The youngest was 11 and the oldest was 35. Eastham's conference drew over 40 investigators who were eager to compare notes about the cases in their regions. Several of the cases turned out to share commonalities. At the conference, Corporal Frank Burylow said he believed there was a clear connection among some of the Alberta cases. As quoted in the Calgary Herald, quote, RCMP analytical expert Corporal Frank Burylow said that there are similarities linking the killings of Melissa, Barbara, Tara, and a Vietnamese victim named Dan Ha, aged 19. They were all working at hotels in the Banff area during the summer. Each was strangled. Dan Ha was a 19-year-old Vietnamese refugee who had come to Canada 7 months before. She was working as a chambermaid at a hotel in Banff. Her body was found February 28, 1981, near Golden. She lay face down in the snow just a few meters from the Trans-Canada Highway, 200 kilometers from Banff. She had been raped and strangled, and her body mutilated after death. Another case that was brought up at the conference was that of Marie Judy Goudreau. Sergeant Floyd McCausland of the Calgary RCMP had told the Calgary Herald that Melissa Rehorek's death could possibly be related to the murder of 17-year-old Marie. Marie, who lived in Edmonton, disappeared while returning to her family's farm on the night of August 2, 1976. Her partially nude body was found 2 days later in a watery ditch off Highway 60 north of Devon. She was strangled and sexually assaulted. According to Edmonton TV News, her car was found still running just after midnight on August 3rd on Range Road 244. The driver's side door was open. Her purse with money and other belongings was still inside, but her brown pants and navy socks were never found. Investigators at the conference also compared notes on the murder of Pauline Brazeau, which we've already discussed. As you can hear, there were so many murders that bore startling similarities and that could easily have been connected or not connected, that investigators in the pre-DNA, pre-cell phone, pre-traffic cam era were behind the 8 ball. And while the RCMP continued to work the cases behind the scenes, the public perception was that these cases were largely being ignored. A 1982 article in the Calgary Herald documents the devastation felt by the families left behind with no answers and little attention from the authorities. Sadly, the families of Melissa Rehorek and Barbara MacLean felt the RCMP was neglecting their loved ones, declining to provide any information on the status of their investigations. Margaret Rehorek said, quote, I don't want to be critical of the RCMP, but it seems something should be done. Barbara's father, Dr. MacLean, told the Calgary Herald he was, quote, very disappointed with the Mounties, end quote, who, he said, never contacted him unless he initiated the call. Quote, there's been no follow-up. They have a lot to learn about public relations and the sympathy and apathy for the families of the victims. I was horrified to see that in 1984, the RCMP took a look at Henry Lee Lucas. RCMP investigator John Hart said that 13 highway murders between 1976 and 1980 indeed fit Lucas's pattern. Apparently, Lucas had claimed to have killed 12 women in 4 or 5 visits to Canada, although in typical fashion, he didn't specify who or in what area or when. In early 1985, after the RCMP interviewed Lucas, a press conference was held announcing that they did consider him a suspect. Eva Dvorak and Patsy McQueen received some attention in 1989, but not from the RCMP, from the Calgary Herald. Martha Dvorak, Eva's sister, told the paper, quote, a day doesn't go by where I don't think about it. We'd really like to know what happened. It's still hard for my mother to talk about. The same article says, quote, RCMP investigators are confident Melissa Rehorek's killer is the same man who strangled Barbara Jean MacLean 5 months later. Both women had been hitchhiking, they were both choked to death, and their bodies were abandoned in similar circumstances, end quote. But you'll note, the RCMP was not lumping Eva's and Patsy's deaths in with all the others, which had occurred in the same time frame in the same region. This was because they still weren't certain how to categorize the girls' deaths, leaving the families in limbo. This from a January 1989 article in the Calgary Herald. RCMP aren't sure how Eva Dvorak and Patricia Marie McQueen died, or even whether they were murdered. An autopsy failed to reveal a cause of death of the friends, although Investigator Corporal Al Carlisle said both had taken an inhalant like Pam's spray-on cooking oil. Quote, "It's possible they died accidentally while using a noxious substance of some kind. We cannot rule out murder, but it would appear to be accidental deaths," end quote. They knew, of course, that someone had dumped the girls' bodies under the Happy Valley overpass, but that person could have been someone who panicked when the girls OD'd, rather than someone with an intent to kill. Sergeant McCausland had told the Calgary Herald there was a, quote, "remote possibility" that Melissa Rehorek's murder was related to Patsy and Eva's case, as they had all last been seen hitchhiking in Calgary. One suspect who was of interest to the mid-1990s investigators was Gary McAstocker, who hanged himself in 1994 at age 34 as police were closing in on him. He was the prime suspect in the abduction and suspected murder of 14-year-old Tina McPhee of Edmonton. McAstocker had already served time for a 1982 rape and a 1988 sexual assault. According to the Calgary Herald, he was also the prime suspect in the 1976 murder of Edmonton teenager Marie Judy Goudreau. He was also a person of interest in the Barbara MacLean case because he was working for a moving company in Calgary at the time of her murder. And according to the Herald, the Edmonton Moving Company employees, quote, "often stayed at the Highlander while on Calgary on business." The Highlander was where Barbara had had a fight with her boyfriend and had disappeared. In the late 1990s, all the unsolved Calgary cases were entered into Canada's version of VICAP, the Violent Crime Linkage Analysis System, which helps investigators identify commonalities among crimes. And with the late 1990s and early 2000s, the DNA era was ushered in, and testing began on some of the items of evidence remaining from the 1970s era crimes. In 2003, for the first time in the modern era, another collaborative effort to solve the spate of cold case killings of women known as the highway murders was underway. The Joint RCMP Task Force was established to tackle a rash of murders around the Edmonton area, but soon it expanded to become the investigative body looking into unsolved historic homicides, missing persons, and serial killers. So the 1970s-era Calgary cases were included. Many of the Edmonton cases were resolved by the 2006 arrest of serial killer Thomas Svelka, but the Calgary cases remained open. The task force had received $16.8 million Canadian dollars in funding by 2011. Yet Melissa, Barbara, Dawn, Eva, Patsy, Pauline, Tara, and Marie saw no arrests. RCMP Sergeant Val Lahaye headed up the task force and told the Calgary Herald, quote, "It's important for people to remember that these cases were already thoroughly investigated by competent investigators. It's our job to go through them for things that may have been missed and analyze the information to see if there are any new strategies to help zero in on the persons responsible," end quote. Well, this was not released at the time, but behind the scenes there had been a staggering turn of events. In the early 2000s, Canada had established its National DNA Databank. This is a database of convicted offender DNA and unknown offender crime scene DNA, which as of now contains about 500,000 DNA profiles. In 2002 and 2003, the RCMP Forensic Laboratory had conducted new DNA testing on samples from some of the Calgary crimes. These included Melissa and Barbara's cases. Semen samples from both cases yielded male DNA profiles that were entered into the new database. And in March 2003, the database provided a scientific affirmation of the theories that various RCMP investigators had expressed for decades. The DNA samples from Melissa and Barbara were from the same man. The same killer had indeed struck twice within mere months on the streets of Calgary, targeting very similar victims and using almost identical MOs. I think it's really interesting that this information was not publicly released. I struggle with understanding why. There seems to me to be very little downside to revealing publicly that two murders from the 1970s have been linked. Perhaps the knowledge that this guy had done it more than once would be the tipping point needed to get someone to come forward with a tip. Perhaps a member of the public would know of a connection between the two victims that the investigators did not. But anyway, the fact that Barbara and Melissa were murdered by the same man was not disclosed, and the public remained none the wiser. Over the ensuing years, the unknown suspect's DNA sample remained in the National DNA Databank and didn't receive any more hits. The DNA profile was also compared against anyone whom the police suspected in the two cases, men like Gary McAstocker, the 1990 suspect who had hung himself. He was ruled out by DNA. And the DNA was twice run against the U.S. CODIS database. Here's how that works on the relatively rare occasion in which it's done. Canadian authorities wanting to check whether a particular DNA profile might be connected to one in the U.S. make a request to Interpol, the International Criminal Police Organization. Interpol then contacts the FBI, which arranges for a CODIS administrator to effect the requested search of the U.S.'s national DNA database. This was done twice on the sample from the Rehorek and MacLean cases, once in 2006 and again in 2012. It was a long shot since both murders happened in Canada, and there was no indication that anyone from the U.S. was involved. But in the interests of thorough investigation and knowing that Calgary is not too far from the U.S.-Canadian border, it was deemed appropriate. Well, nothing came of it. A 2011 article in the Calgary Herald about the unsolved murders quoted Jim Rehorek, Melissa's older brother. He said, quote, "I gave up a long time ago hoping that they would ever really find anybody. After a while, you start to think, what are the odds?" End quote. The odds at that time were not good. Even with DNA, there was no ability in 2011 to determine the source. In 2016, in honor of the 40th anniversary of Eva's and Patsy's slayings, the CBC did a story on the quest of the Dvoraks and McQueens to find the killer of their girls. Eva's sister Martha said, quote, "It just seems like nobody cares, and I mean, it's been 40 years and it still hurts for both the girls. We don't know what happened, that's the thing. And that kind of eats at you, If you knew, then it probably would add some closure to it," said Gord McQueen, Patsy's older brother. "You think about it all the time. I mean, I do, and I know my brothers and sisters do too. They think about it all the time." The RCMP, asked for comment, stated that the cases remained open. The case file was massive, filled with dead-end tips, leads, and avenues of investigation. Any new leads that came in were immediately run down, and every new investigator pored over the file looking for anything that had been missed. It was a massive investigation. Here is what the RCMP has released about their efforts to solve the Calgary murder cases. This is from a statement released by the RCMP. For nearly 50 years, the Alberta RCMP exhausted all investigational means in an attempt to identify the person responsible for these tragic deaths. In total, for all of the investigation, nearly 800 tips were received and investigated. Approximately 500 statements or inquiries were completed with members of the public. 853 suspects or persons of interest were identified, and investigators used police techniques available at the time to include or exclude them from the files. 1,490 vehicles were identified and investigated with the hope of identifying the one belonging to the actual suspect. And no less than 70 officers were directly involved as field investigators over the years. All that work, and it would take genealogy to provide the elusive answers. This is the end of Part 1 of the Calgary murders. Part 2 is available right now.